This morning, when I was cooking up my rather lovely scrambled eggs this morning, I heard on the radio news that a government minister had popped up to assure us, the British public, the great British public, that there were plans in place to make sure that we don't suffer power cuts in the upcoming months over winter during this energy crisis. Of course, what that means in reality is there are going to be, or are likely to be, power cuts, and we have to believe, apparently, that our government, the Liz Truss government, yes, the Liz Truss government have got a handle on the energy crisis, which I almost choked to death, laughing over the notion that they had a handle on what's coming up, because of course they don't. They don't have a handle on their own backsides. These are completely incompetent, as we've all seen, totally inept people who live in denial. I mean, just before we got Liz Truss, as Johnson was on the way out the door, one of his last official visits was to go and speak to President Zelensky and his government in Ukraine, and told them that we, the great British public, were happy and willing to bear the huge energy price hike and energy cuts that might be coming up, blackouts and things. We were happy to bear it if it meant supporting Mr. Zelensky's government in the Ukraine conflict. And of course, within the space of weeks, we went from that to Liz Truss and her Chancellor borrowing to pay for an energy price cap. So the messaging from the Tories is all over the place. But then at the same time, if you watch her in interviews, she will also repeat what Johnson said. So you can't, no sane person, no person who actually listens to what these people say, can base anything, any sort of confidence. This is what's happened in the financial markets. Any confidence in anything they say. It's all contradictory. You can tell they're just spouting and haven't got a clue what to do. But it's not just, of course, it's not just a problem here in the UK, because what do Liz Truss here? What does Chancellor Scholz in Germany, President Macron of France, Sleepy Joe Biden in America? What do they all have in common? They're utterly clueless, and they're utterly spineless. Oh, I've left out one of Frankenstein's brides. What's her name? Whatever it is. The EU commissioner, is she, or something? They're utterly spineless. They're utterly clueless. They're all part of the same club, which is you're getting shafted club. Us, we're getting shafted by our so-called leaders. They're not leaders. No matter what you think about Vladimir Putin, you can't deny that he has completely outclassed all of these so-called leaders on his own. He appears to be more switched on than them, smarter than them. Of course, held and still holds to an extent the trump card, pardon the pun, of vast amounts of gas that most of Europe need, and large part of our energy economy needs. We had the Nord Stream pipelines, 3 out of 4 of them damaged last week, was it now? But there is still the Nord Stream pipeline, which was being completed around about the time that the Ukraine conflict kicked off in February. At the German end, pressure was put on Schultz, the German Chancellor, by America, which is what happens, to be honest, to not, let them finish it, but not turn it on, to put pressure on Russia, economic pressure on Russia as part of the sort of the sanctions and things, So that's turned off, but with the underwater pipelines being damaged, that pipeline is still feasibly, physically there and usable. And at the moment, Russia's letting Europe know that, letting Germany know that if you want to turn it on at your end, we'll, if you want to talk to us, we'll turn it on at our end, and you won't suffer the energy crisis you're about to. Germany's about to suffer the most, from what we can see, what we can tell, because their industry, their public, depend on Russian gas to survive, to keep going, more than any other European country. So, Germany's sort of the linchpin in Europe. Germany now has a choice, or the leaders of Germany now have a choice, and that's, are they going to continue to basically do what Joe Biden and America want as far as policy in Europe and against Russia, which is, damaging their industry and is going to damage it worse than the rest of the countries in Europe, and the public? Or are they going to finally look at their own interests and see that it's in their interests to negotiate with Russia and get the pipeline turned on? This is my point today. For too long, our country, France, Germany, the European Union, have been utterly subordinate to US pressure to go along with their policy in Europe. Much of it is to, of course, butt up against Russia, because Russia, economically, militarily, has been rising since the 1990s, when it was at its lowest sort of point economically and as a power in the world. And it's slowly, carefully, and here we are with Ukrainian war. And the Ukrainian war, of course, isn't. It's a bit of a shop window in a way, because it's not really. The war's not really about Ukraine. It's a war between. It's a proxy war between Russia and the United States, and obviously Germany, France, Ukraine, and the Zelensky government, and us. We're the American policy, military sort of partners and power here on the European continent, and where we are, of course, close to Europe. So it's a proxy war that we're sort of obliged to be involved in economically. We're obliged to be part of the sanctions against Russia economically, but of course it's affecting us. It's not affecting the US. The US are way over there. They've got their own gas and things like that. It's mainland Europe and us that are relying on Russian gas, Russian power, to heat our homes, keep our industry going, to make, fuel. OPEC, of course, headed and run effectively by the Saudis, who historically have been partners with the US. I think yesterday or the day before decided to slash the amount of oil it would be producing, which is exactly the opposite of what Biden and the Biden administration have been begging them to do. They've been begging them to increase oil production so that they could keep oil in the US abundant and cheap. They haven't done that. They've gone the opposite way. A huge piece of news, which really puts the pressure on the US domestically. And it'll be interesting to see where that goes, what happens there. A snub, really, to the US from OPEC and their partners, the Saudis. So that's very interesting. So oil and gas are absolutely essential, important, key things here in all of this. And my argument would be, and I think many more people are agreeing with me, including Nigel Farage, including, all the right-wing commentators. I mean, I'm not right-wing commentators, but so people from across the political spectrum here are realising that we're sort of cutting off our nose to spite our face, because our interests, the interests of the people of Germany, the people of France, the people of various European countries, the part of the EU, their interests are not aligned with Joe Biden's administration's, the US's policy in Europe and against Russia. They're just not, because they're not suffering. they're not suffering. They're not about to suffer. Well, in some respects, but not like us. They're not going to have the problems we're having. Germany has got lots of news out through their media, which is well founded, I think, today and over the past week or so, of their main papers and news outlets warning of deindustrialization of Germany, factories closing, mass unemployment, because they can't secure the gas that they used to power their industry. So how is it in their benefit to continue sanctions against Russia and shut their economy down effectively, which of course has knock-on consequences for the people that work and live in Germany? And of course it's to a lesser extent, it's the same here. So my argument would be to start to think of our own needs before America's. But unfortunately, we have each of the countries I've mentioned and the EU, we have utterly spineless people in charge, spineless leaders. They're not leaders, of course. They're yes men and yes women for the US and whichever government happens to be in charge at the time, and that's not good for us. It's really not good for us. So we need to start splitting away from US policy in Europe, economic policy and sanctions, and look after, whatever you may think, the first thoughts, the first duty of any leader of a country is to its own people, first and foremost, not to another country's population. The Tories, the Johnson government, I can't say the Liz Truss government because she hasn't been elected by us, but which is one of the problems. But they, they were elected by us in a general election. They weren't elected by the people of France or Germany or the European Union, and vice versa. We didn't elect Joe Biden. We didn't elect Schultz or Macron or Van der What's-her-face. I can never remember her name. A scary-looking lady in the EU. We didn't elect them. Well, who did elect her? That's one of the problems with the European Union democracy, of course. But, their responsibility is to their people, their population. Liz Truss, the Tories, our government's responsibility is to us, not to America. And I think more and more of us are cottoning onto that rather obvious fact, So anyway, that's all I've got to say about that today. Tell me what you think. If you disagree or agree, pop it down below in the comment section, won't you? And I'll see you next time. I've got something that pops into my head. Ciao for now.